itself in the 1400s. The Pompeii was destroyed in an eruption in the 1600s, in the 16th century, 1500s. And we know that because the implements that are uncovered there are medieval in origin, and that there was only one eruption in Vesuvius that could have covered Pompeii, and it occurred in that year. And if we look at the Bible itself as a referential book, if the material in the Bible was accurate, then it must be accurate, and divine inspiration or whatever aside. And so if we find that the Bible describes the birth of its main character here, the Christ figure, as occurring at a time when we get a supernova that creates a particular kind of a star effect that lasts this long and then follows 33 years later by a solar eclipse that lasts for 3.5 hours, covering the whole planet for 3.5 hours, then we can say to ourselves, aha, if we can run our software against all of the star charts and everything and plot and find this particular occurrence 33 years apart, we'll know exactly when this thing occurred. And, well, hey, the lunar eclipse occurred in 1078.
Okay. We actually have, we did have somebody calling in to ask a question, but they have stopped calling. Following up on this, is there, has this guy written any books? Is there something that we can get our hands on to read?
Anatoly Fomenko is a corresponding, and that term means something in Russia, a corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He's produced 7 volumes, 4 of which have been translated into English. They're called History, Fact, or Science. Also called Chronologies 1 through 7. Now, Anatoly's work from 1973 through into volume 4 is all about the deconstruction and why we know it to be true that history is false. Now, it is true that Anatoly attempts in volumes 6 and 7, along with his team. It's not just him. We're talking a team that is several hundred individuals approaching this from interdisciplinary, not only astronomers, but also people that are document analysts like myself, and I can speak to that. But anyway, he tries to recreate history, and he's got a Russian bias that he can't shed, and so that creeps in. And also some of his other stuff is suspect in terms of some of the conclusions that he's drawing as to what actually occurred. But I'm convinced that he's accurate that what didn't happen, he's 100% on the deconstruction, and we're all grasping now, because so much has been hidden from us, that his attempt at reconstructing history is going to be as good as anybody else's until we all get into it and really start burrowing around to find out what's going on. But I now think that the catacombs in the Vatican do not contain several thousand-year-old records, because the Vatican was basically established in the 1400s. They may contain a lot of stuff that's hauled in from here, there, and elsewhere. But, for instance, the documents that they have, that they've examined, pretty much the Anatoly and his group pretty much conclusively show that the what was known as the pious forgeries movement extended multiple levels. So there was this guy who was reputed to have written in Latin and be a Roman chronicler at the time, more or less a couple hundred years after Christ lived, theoretically in the year 0 realm. And this guy was a known pious forger. In other words, he theoretically, in the year 100 and something, he wrote a bunch of stuff to validate his faith that Christ existed and so on, and then he tried to create these things for history. But what's really interesting was the guy himself was a fiction created in the 1400s, and that's when they manufactured the stages of the cross. There was never a Council of Nicaea. None of that occurred. Constantinople, all of that business was taken from Middle Ages and pushed back. The level of the fraud is staggering, but if we look at the analysis of it, basically it means that Catholicism and Christianity predates Islam by no more than 200 years, and that Judaism predates Christianity by probably less than 167 years. And its calendar of being 5,000 years is also completely spurious. Anatoly's work involves things like the whole team involves things like astronomical alignments. They're specifically mentioned in documents that prove that these documents could not have been referencing the time they claim to, because there was never an astronomical alignment of that time there. And we know that this is the case now because we have software, but the guys who made the forgeries could not have known the level of our science now. And this goes back to a thing that we saw in 1997, along with the sun disease. There was this beginning thread that we eventually named the death of religions, without knowing how it could occur. But there is something in this Anatoly work that is so, or this critical thinking movement that is so hugely resonant or mind-grabbing that it makes me think right now that the seeds are already out there. I know they're out there in Russia, and he's got all 7 volumes in Russian out there, and now that they're in English and selling off of Amazon as fast as they can print them, things are going to change. You're going to have a lot of people reappraising their relationship with the organizations that have been selling all these religious myths. Now, it doesn't mean that the theology is in a way bogus or spurious, but the details that they use to sell the theology and the control that they have over you as a result of being the person selling it, that's going to seriously shift.
So what we're going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, that it's not the religion itself, it's the organization behind it, basically like the banks.
Correct.
It's basically like the derivative market, where you're not investing in the company anymore, you're investing in
an abstraction upon a guess.
Yeah, that's how do we reconcile something like the like in ancient Egypt with the Exodus? How do we reconcile the dates with that?
Well,
are those dates wrong too? I mean,
correct. That's correct. The Israelis never, the Jewish population never worked on the Egyptian pyramids. They were never slaves to the Egyptians. Much of that level of the Egyptian history can be recreated. There are some anomalies about Egyptian history that are rather striking. For one thing, virtually all the hieroglyphs were able to be translated from Napoleonic time onward. So linguistically, we know that something occurred. And if you actually go back there, you find that Napoleon's group discovered that the hieroglyphs are not ancient Egyptian. They're in fact a pictorial representation, an ideograph of what was known as Coptic, the spoken language of the people who lived in Egypt prior to being taken over by the Islamics, and the supplementation of that by Arabic. And so, of course, these people, once they realized that, they went and learned Coptic, and then they could go read the hieroglyphs just as though they were reading, your daily newspaper. And yet, it had theoretically not been able to be determined by anybody for thousands of years, yet everybody who lived in the country spoke the language and could have easily read the hieroglyphs to anybody who wanted to ask them about them. So much of that is just entirely bogus. Plus, I have personal knowledge from a friend of mine who was allowed an extraordinary visit, and he climbed on top of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid in Giza. Yeah. It's something they don't let you do, right? And right. His report of having been there is that the sea creatures that we all know about on the pyramid are in fact embedded in the stone. And so Anatoly Fomenko's group, it wasn't Anatoly, and he actually fought the idea for some time, I'm told, came up with this idea that the whole idea that the pyramids were made out of cement is true. The one missing key factor in that theory is the lime kilns. In order to have that much cement, the pyramids are massive. Any way you look at it, if they were chiseled out of stone, the stone had to come from somewhere, and yet we find no quarries anywhere where that amount of stone could come from. Plus, if it was actually made out of chunks of stone that these poor Jewish guys under whips had to haul up a ramp, that ramp would still be in existence because it would have more mass in it than that pyramid, and would have had more mass in it than some countries. So where would they have put it afterwards? So there was no ramp found on any of these pyramids, so the construction method could not have been as described in any Judeo-Christian work at all. And now we discover that the key missing ingredient to the cement issue is the lime kilns. And there is a history of major lime kiln operations that extend from what we think of as Western Mongolia in a giant arc terminating in Egypt. And now that we have the history getting closer, and we think of things a little bit differently, we know that these lime kilns were in existence at the same time that the pyramids were created. Exactly, and also in book 1, we discovered that all the cathedrals are not as has been described to us in Europe, and that when they go and they do mortar dating tests on them, they can show the results to support the suppositions that are coming out that everybody had by basis of document study. And let me say about the document study. You're going to get a lot of people that say, oh, you can't study documents and you can't tell when something was written just by the words that were used. And I dispute that. And in fact, there's a whole a study about such kind of document analysis that says precisely that. The language employed describes the person employing that language as much as the subject. And so when we get to things like Ptolemy, the great astronomer who wrote this supposedly monumental, seminal astronomy work way back in 137 AD, mm-hmm. and he is writing with language that is typical of 14th century florific Italian, then you know it was written in the 14th century in Italy, not in Egypt in the 137 AD. And when that is true with his great work. I've never read it. I've often read about it. But when I read in the volume 3 of the history series here about the Ptolemy being a fake, I went and read the Almagest, and I'm here to tell you that was written in the 14th century in Italy, because the language, even though it was in Latin, has the same flourish, and everything speaks to Italian publication for a nobleman, which would not be the case if it had been written in the supposed 137 AD.
Yeah, and I think anybody in the audience that doesn't grasp that, go and look at the early documents of our own country and think about how we speak now and look at those, and you can tell basically what era those are written in, because it's English, but the words are different, the flourishes are different, and the adjectives and verbs and everything are different, right?
Correct. Plus, in this case, we have a document that was written in Latin, and everybody who translates into Latin from their own native language imposes a certain constraint on those translations. So the person who wrote the Almagest was not a native Latin thinker or writer and spoke natively Italian, because it shows clearly in which words they chose the conjugations, the declinations, and how they chose to use the imperative.
Wow. That's
and that's one of thousands and thousands of cited cases. Anatoly's group did something remarkable. They're part
crap. This is just yeah, I never expected this conversation to go in this direction. I'm just my mind is reeling at this point, Cliff.
It's the same here, and I've been reading this stuff for weeks, and it's going to take me months to integrate it and decide how to react to the world with this new knowledge. But the thing that Anatoly did that was really smart on his part, that I know that it was his personal decision, was that he decided way back when that they would put in every single data item they found into these books, such that when you came to discuss it as a reader of their book with someone else, you would have all of the facts at your disposal to get the point across, because it is such mind-warping, point-of-view shattering information.
Wow. I've had 2 people in the chat so far that say that this is the most interesting interview you've ever given.
Well, hey, wait until I get into books 5 and 6.
All right, let's switch gears here for a little while for the rest of the show, because I'm not sure if I could take much more of this.
Yeah, I will. Okay, that's good. But let me also point out that we don't have books 5 and 6 in English yet, so I'm forced to read them in Russian, so it'll be slow going.
Yeah. Just take your time and stop hurting our brains, please. Oh my God, I've got to look at some more of this stuff, because this is just stunning.
It is truly staggering.
It's staggering beyond the point of belief. You hear it and you say, Cliff must be on some kind of what the hell kind of drugs do you got in your pie out there?
Well, it wouldn't make any difference. There's no drug that would come to this level of shattering of your brain. I mean, I've done acid, and it won't have as permanent an effect on me as reading these books. This is staggering. These people, the critical thinking movement is what I started getting hints of this years ago, because I have a history of having been in Europe and been into Russia and speak Russian and neo-Chinhata show, but I still speak and understand the stuff. I have contacts in Russia and so on, and there were hints of this coming out, but they are keeping this rather tightly controlled at the government level. They're not suppressing it, but they're not advertising that this critical thinking movement is sweeping through their entire social structure. Obviously, because a lot of people still are defending the old paradigm, and they don't want to upset the apple cart. They want it to emerge naturally. And when you get into the critical thinking stuff, it really is staggering. For instance, some of the stuff coming out in it suggests that people like Isaac Newton went through ages of work to accommodate a lunar structure, what's known as the libration of the moon, based on a historical stuff, and he was matching it against bogus history, so no wonder none of his math worked about the moon. And if he only knew the history was bogus, he would have just saved himself 28 years.
That's just crazy talk. That's insane.
But I don't want anybody to believe me. I want them to go on out and find these books and read them. They are online in Russian. So you can get at a lot of the material if you want to go and try and do the translations, but the auto translations are not really that good.
Okay. Well, I've got some people in the chat wanting to know about why they should smoke pot, but we're going to ignore that. I have
No. Let's look at some of this stuff, okay? Because it's all really related. You cannot.
Okay. Let me read you the exact question. This is from GZ420. Ask about the sacred plant marijuana and why we should smoke it. That's what the question is. If you want to go there, feel free. I'm not going to go there myself.
Sure, and let me tell you that there are many people that consider me to be a shaman. And coming from that perspective, I know about the 7 sacred plant teachers. Marijuana is down there in the first group of 3, the milder ones. And the very top is Salvia divinorum. I am here to tell you that unless you are a shaman, leave Salvia alone. It will destroy you, and you will not gain from it. It is not a recreational drug. The reasons one person should smoke or ingest THC in the form of the cannabinoids from the plant themselves has to do with the fact that it is a neurogenic substance. You actually grow new neurons as a result of having it. It also, now we know, blocks out some of the 5 billion impressions you get from your reality every day, most of which you do not remember, but which take up a considerable amount of your energy, and thus allows you to free up and create new neural pathways. So it is also neurotonic in that sense, in that you grow new neural pathways. This has been shown. Harvard just recently came on out and showed that the THC molecule itself, in contact with a cancer cell, kills the cancer cell. So it doesn't just merely help you from the perspective of you're not throwing up so much from the chemo. It actually gets in there and kills the cancer cell. And also, there is no link whatsoever to the ingestion through smoke of marijuana and lung cancer. And if we look at the alternative, we're facing huge, horrific, stressful times. Many people will turn to the legal alternative that the powers that be want to foist on you. That legal alternative is alcohol. Now, I have a weird relationship with alcohol because my father was an alcoholic. I don't drink because I'm a meditator, but I tried to teach myself to drink in my 40s and discovered to my to a satisfactory conclusion what it did to my meditative body, and I will not touch alcohol because alcohol is not a drug. Alcohol is a toxin, and you intoxicate yourself by drinking alcohol. Give me someone who does drugs any day as opposed to someone who is poisoning themselves deliberately with alcohol. It also causes your vibrations to go for months in an altered form that drugs do not. You can have THC remnant in your body perhaps 45 or 50 days after smoking the stuff because it'll still cling to receptors in your brain. But the clinging in the receptors in the brain do not alter the vibrations that you create, or the key feelings and stuff, the way that the alcohol does, because the alcohol destroys the receptors and kills the brain cells. It is truly a toxin. And so let us discuss things as adults. Humans, at least 40% of any human species or any human civilization, at least 40% of the individuals will be drug users. This is also shown in birds. Some species of birds, 40% of them, want to get intoxicated and will suck down alcohol wherever they can find it. Other birds use naturally occurring substances like kava and others. So it is not just humans that want to use drugs. The experience of being alive, especially in terrible, stressful times, is such that you need relief, as they say, basically whatever gets you through the night. But I'm here to tell you that the toxins that are in alcohol will not do you any good. And this is somebody who's got French blood going back I don't know how long, that, I have a good feeling about wine, and I like wine, but I'll never drink it. But the concept is appealing. And yet I know that the wine itself, in spite of all of the glamour and everything that's been put around it, and glamour, by the way, means magic and delusion at its core. But all of that is covering up the fact that it is an intoxicant that the powers that be want to foist on you. So it's kind of like this. If I were going to smoke cigarettes, I wouldn't smoke any commercial cigarette. I would go and try and find as raw tobacco as I could and make my own, simply because I know the powers that be are screwing around and trying to get at me through my addiction. And they're going to try and mess with me this way. And they're going to try and do this and get me into a situation of alcohol consumption. We're, in fact, seeing that in the Washington state. Costco and a bunch of other companies here are trying to force the state of Washington to divest itself of its alcohol stores. The state itself is the only licensed legal seller of hard liquor in this state. And we have a lot of restrictions on who can buy wine and other alcohol because we didn't, as a state, they decided way back when that this is the way that we wanted to organize ourselves. But now Costco and these other companies have decided that they want to sell more liquor. And they're offering greater levels of revenue and greater marketing to get people to buy in the idea through an initiative and change our law. But fundamentally, what will occur? If Costco is correct and we're going to get greater tax revenues, then what must occur is there must be greater alcohol sales, which will degrade the society. Because as the Native American guys over here in Spokane note, you do not build a nation selling alcohol, tobacco, and fireworks and gambling to each other. Right. You build a nation by demanding greater of yourself. And I'm saying that we will always have drugs around, and it is better that we get the shamanic approach and build a structure that allows our society to continue and grow, even though we're going to always have this drug use. Look at the war on drugs and the horrific cost. And has it been successful? And how long has it been going on now? Let's see, 30 years, 40 years? When are we going to call a halt to this experiment and say that it's failed?
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We got less than 10 minutes left. I have one last question that actually appeals to me. And apparently the chat is going insane over that last question. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But speaking of marijuana, that must be why I'm a super genius. Enough said about that. Okay, we have another question.
No. Let's stop and make one comment.
Okay.
Carl Sagan.
Yes.
Smoked every damn day.
Yeah.
And geniuses abound that will say to you, Bob Marley, when you smoke the herb, it introduces you to yourself. And once you have introduced to yourself, a lot of crap falls away. And once the crap falls away, you can become a self-actualizing human.
That's, I can't say anything other than it's more people than what people would think that are against it. That actually partake in it, and it's, I don't know, I guess that's my point of view just from the generation that I grew up in. But getting to our last question, and this is something that goes back probably about a half an hour here. This has to do with the powers that be depopulation plan versus the solar/Earth changes.
Yeah.
So the Earth changes was one that would affect humanity more rather than the power that be depopulation plan. Can you elaborate on that in 8 minutes?
Yeah, I can. Fairly quickly. Okay. The powers that be depopulation plan won't work. It's repeatedly run into problem after problem after problem, and I think at some huge fundamental level involving karma, there is like blockages in the universe that would prevent this from happening.
Yes.
On the other hand, we have demonstrable evidence that huge empires arose and fell as a result of diaspora, of the people being moved by changes in the environment, especially relative to their food and their habitat. And some of the greatest ones in our memory and actual measurable history that we can track down include people like Temujin or Genghis Khan that basically led to the formation of what is modern China as a result of population movements being forced by climate change. Those kind of population movements are indeed seen. Now, here's the rub. The powers that be assume that they're going to be able to move a large part of the population of Europe into Africa, and that's why they've been so steadily trying to depopulate Africa. And it hasn't been working all that well for them. And the same thing sort of tried to be done in South America with the idea that they would relocate at least some of the population of North America down in South America as the weather changes force us that way in the mini ice age. So this is demonstrably part of the plan, even though you see that they're making major investment in Arctic area infrastructure around Finland, all through Russia, and this kind of stuff, because the Russians have a different approach to it. They're going to take advantage of the cold. So that, for instance, we'll have giant server farms that won't need a single bit of electricity to ever be spent on air conditioning, right. That sort of thing.
Huh, okay.
But the Russians, by the way, the Russians, even their government is even openly, if you read enough Russian, you can go in on some of their sites and see their discussions about how the population is going to have to be educated to cope with being shifted, because it will be forced on us. They just don't know when and how rapidly.
Okay. I've had 2 requests for this question, and I think this will probably wrap up the show. Have you seen, or have there been any signs of what we saw in the last report with bodyguards being hired by the powers that be, the banksters, the minions, and the like? Are they moving towards actually doing the hiring the bodyguards?
It's already happened. It's already happened, and if you were in the mercenary business and paid attention to that, you would have seen the hiring calls that went out about 5 or 6 months ago, that we more than doubled the amount of money going into private security forces. As of about, curiously, the Fukushima, so about April or so, it really started to impact. Now, also, by the way, you'll also note the side effect of that has occurred. There have been a number of, let's say, mysterious murders of very highly placed bankers in Europe and in Asia,
Yes.
which are entirely inside jobs because they were forced to hire and increase their security staff too rapidly, and thus they let cracks in, and these people were taken out.
Huh. The old tragic one-car accident in the garage while you're sleeping in bed.
No, these are three bullets in the neck, and especially in the case of the guy in Asia that I'm aware of, there was 3 bullets in the neck.
What country in Asia?
Well, he is he has he was actually killed in Myanmar, but he has crescent area there influence. So he's got businesses that go down into Indonesia and this kind of stuff. And the guy was particularly a rapacious banker.
Mm-hmm. That's folks, I think we're about ready to wrap up the show, and I think this is probably one of the best courses of world history that I've heard in a long time. This is something I think that everybody needs to follow up on, this critical thinking going on in Russia.
It led to the explosion. It's going through all their sciences. So all their sciences are going through a revolution as to what's possible without the assumptions of what is not possible. And this led to the many rumors that are coming on out that the Russians have technology that allows them to work with titanium in a liquid state that is not hot. It's at room temperature. Staggering, absolutely staggering to think of what you could do with that.
Is any of this bleeding over into our side of the world, into our country? Are any of these people teaching this over here?
Not.
Can we please get the crap science out of us.
Well, that's what
Is there any possible way that we could do that, please? I'm begging you guys over there in Russia. Come on over here and help us.
No. You misunderstand. We have to do our own critical thinking. You can't. This is freedom, dude. You don't have it given to you. That's liberty. Freedom you take on your own. So you stand up and you say, this is bogus. We're going to get rid of this crap science and find out what's real, and not believe what the teachers have had to force on us. Because many of the teachers know it's crud too. But no, we have to do that ourselves. The Russians, once we get into it, I'm sure they'll help, because they're very actually gregarious and generous people, and I love them dearly. but they are hamstrung by the fact that we are constrained. We live in a prison system.
Yeah, we got to figure out a way out of that.
We do.
My producer has asked whether or not we can set up a follow-up interview with you, say in a month or two. Would that be possible? You don't have to answer that on the air. I would love to have you back on the show. This has been an absolutely astounding interview, I think.
If we do it in a month, you'll have had a chance to read some of Anatoly's work.
Yes.
His last name is
looking at that and seeing if Google can do a translation for me.
Well, it won't do too well, but you can get some of the books off of Amazon and share them around and stuff. But his last name is Fomenko, Fomenko, Anatoly Fomenko. But the book is called History, Fiction or Science. And then now we discover, well, most of it's fiction, but we're going to have to put some science to it.
That's F-O-M-E-K-O, folks.
Yeah, and this is something, when I lived in Europe, my parents drugged me to every cathedral everywhere, and I always wondered why all of the art showed all these people, you know, the Madonna, the Child, all of these people were always in medieval garb. Well, duh, now I know.
Now we know. All right, that's it for the show, folks. We appreciate everybody showing up. I especially appreciate Cliff High coming onto the show. We don't have any closing music, so we're just going to go ahead and end it. And Cliff, I really, really appreciate you coming on for the premiere episode of Surrounded by People That Just Don't Participate, also known as idiots.
Yeah, the Greeks are going to really show that. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll see you in a month. We'll talk in a month.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Sure.
We all appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
All right, bye.
And, folks, that was it. That was Cliff High here on Surrounded by Idiots. And tomorrow night I will do a short news show, as I am hoping to do pretty much on a nightly basis, bringing you the news of the day as from the point of view of somebody that's looking at all of these idiots that we're surrounded by, because we're just surrounded by these idiots, and I think Cliff has pointed that out to us. So join me tomorrow night for a brief show, same time, same place at 7 o'clock, and we look forward to seeing all of you, and I thank everybody for showing up. And this show will begin repeating in about 20 minutes to a half an hour as soon as I transfer everything over to live stream. It will reappear again on this page, and you'll be able to listen to the whole thing all over again, along with probably an MP3. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. We certainly appreciate it. Have a good night, and I am going to go and, I don't know, I guess my head's going to explode now or something, because this has been something. Have a good evening, folks. Thank you for showing up. Good night.